Well, it's another Wake Up with KC, and today I have been curious and wondering about this topic that I want to talk about. And I've mentioned about quantum physics and how history, science, and spirituality is all connected, and quantum physics, neuroscience. And what about time traveling? Is there such a thing? And what is that experience like if there's some truth to it? So I have a very special guest that's joining me today to talk about that. Derek Loudermilk. Derek, welcome to Wake Up with KC. It's such an honor and a pleasure to have you here today.
Kimberly, thanks for having me.
I am like, first of all, you are in the energetic healing uh world, and I'm, as I think, and I have this funny feeling like you are also like a light worker like myself.
Yeah, there's a lot of labels you could try to pin on me.
But it's just
I
that
do a lot of
resonating.
yeah, I do a lot of exploring different spiritual and metaphysical concepts.
So how did that begin for you? Like what did you experience? What did you go through and like discover or have that realization like, whoa, wait, something, what was your
Yeah,
thing?
yeah. I was trained as a, let's call it, a materialist in the sciences. I was a microbiologist studying viruses and bacteria, the beginnings of life. I worked in Yellowstone. We would go out into the wilderness in Yellowstone National Park and sample in the hot springs and look for little microbes that live in boiling acid or live beneath ice sheets, various different extreme conditions like you might find on other planets or at the beginnings of life on Earth. And so I have this very scientific training. That was kind of a program that I was operating on. I'm just going to be a professor of science when I grow up. It's kind of a thing that I always expected. Um, and then I became a professional adventurer, and I was traveling the world, living in lots of different countries, and started having some pretty rad experiences in my travels. I witnessed a secret ceremony on the slopes of Mount Agung, which is one of the biggest volcanoes in Indonesia. It's in Bali, and they basically 10,000 people turned on rainy season in this secret midnight ceremony that I was in the process of setting a world record, and I stumbled across it, and it was pretty remarkable to you know even the local guides, they didn't really know that it was happening, and so it was really a privilege just to see it. But that was the first time I sort of realized the power of group consciousness to create physical reality. And I had several other experiences. I had sort of my first out of body experience while meditating at Angkor Wat, which is a temple oriented to the sun in Cambodia, one of these ancient sites like the pyramids. And then I encountered a magical tree, which is like not 10,000, a 1,000-year-old tree in the jungles of Bali, which gave me another sort of out of body experience and a mission to take people out into nature and reconnect with nature. But it was a very dramatic, emotionally charged experience. So I had these kind of wild experiences, and my scientific mind started thinking like, well, what is the underlying mechanism? How is this all working? Like, how is it that people can turn on rainy season with a ceremony, or how is it that a tree can alter my state of consciousness? And so there must be some fundamental scientific principles that allow this to happen. And that's when I started exploring. I also had a lot of different hands-on healing experiences with different native shamans and healers in different cultures around the world. Pretty dramatic, just powerful people sharing their work. And so having started to collect all these experiences was just really fascinating. And then I started digging into what is the what does the scientific literature say? What do we know already about how all this phenomenon works? And there's actually extensive research that can back up most of these phenomenons, but most scientists just aren't aware of it, I think.
Well, well, then let me ask you something. I mean, you've discovered like new species in Yellowstone National
Yes.
Park. Can you elaborate on what these species were?
Yeah, these were species of virus, which,
Okay.
so a virus infects single celled organisms. That's what I was studying. And these single celled organisms were living in boiling acid, so a very high temperature, high acidic environment, which some of the hot springs are boiling acid. And so these are they're adapted to their ecological niche, right? If you put them in room temperature water, they'd probably die because they would probably just explode. Um, and they're very simple. There's not much going on. There's just a few proteins really that make them up. But they've been living and replicating in these really tough environments for a long, long time. And so it's just interesting work to see what's there. And then the process of sort of discovering a new species is like, okay, we found a thing that's, you can only see it under a electron microscope. It's 90 nanometers, I think, or
Mm-hmm.
so, very, very small. And smaller than, when you think about human viruses, it's smaller than that. More simple than a human virus even. And you look and you find a new particle, and then you have to describe it. You have to study it. You have to isolate it, get it by itself, purify it in a way, and then sequence the genome and all these different things that allow you to then say, okay, here we definitively have something that's never been characterized before.
Wow, that's interesting in itself. It, when looking at these, these viruses and these species and everything, I'm wondering is if there is like a somewhat of a connection with us and nature kind of way.
Um, Viruses, it's an interesting way of propagating. So the point of a virus, right, is just to continue its genetic lineage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a very simple mechanism to do that. It just allows a living organism to replicate for it. So viruses aren't alive until they infect something. So it's like a dead protein particle. When it infects you, then it's alive while your body is reproducing it. But fundamental to that, there's like, if you think, okay, the material world is a byproduct of the vibration, the field that creates it, right? It's a it's a byproduct of consciousness. So
Mm-hmm.
for any of these things, for a parasite or a virus, there's a there's a frequency to that, right? There's a um,
Electromagnetic field of some sort.
well, I would say, I mean, a parasite at any level, right, is something that is just sort of sucking away the energy from something else, and this happens even galactically speaking. There's sort of larger stars that are being sucked away by smaller stars, and so you could say, okay, well, this is an interesting aspect of biology, but I like to think, what is more fundamental than that, like underlying that, the structure of the atoms and the nature of what it is that's creating a virus or a organism like a human. um, there's so many things that make us up, that would be beyond. mm, there's levels of comprehension, of understanding, right? We can say, we can measure on this level, we're made up of cells and atoms and electromagnetic fields and all these things, but under that, what is there under that? So there's a, a thought form, essentially, that underlies that, a concept of
Wow.
what it is to be a human.
And what was it like living as like a digital nomad when you were on your traveling journey?
Yeah, it's amazing. There's upsides and downsides, of course, trade-offs to everything. The downside, I would say, is that you give up efficiency and productivity. If you're really trying to build a business or create a movement, it's much more effective to have a daily routine. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and uh, so we found, right, when people are moving around a lot, there's these costs to like figuring out where they're going to get food and where they're going to live for a few weeks, and they need to make some new friends quick. And we found this as well. When we would move from country to country, we would try to do it a little slower, like 3 months at a time. And you spend the first month just making friends and getting used to your surroundings, and even having your brain adjust to the language, or driving on the other side of the road, or whatever it might be, which is, when you're immersed in that situation, it explodes your creativity, right? Because you have to look at the world in a new way. So creativity can go way up, and novelty and excitement and joy and all of these things goes way up, but productivity and actually achieving what you want in the world can go down. So there are some trade-offs, but being immersed in different cultures, and also in different ecosystems. Like um, we lived in a rice field pretty much when we lived in Bali. We lived in a surfing village in Portugal, and we lived in an ancient port, as it was part of the Empire of Venice, when we lived in Croatia. So this is like, our house was like 300-year-old house, and the well down the street was 1,500 years old, and things like that. So it immerses you in a completely different framework for living, which, what that does, if you're an entrepreneur or a scientist or a spiritual explorer, that allows you to basically say, okay, I have this existing framework, but I know there's lots of other ways of looking at this. And it makes it so that your beliefs aren't so rigid, so that like belief systems can be swapped out much more easily, which allows um, probably allows you to hone in on the truth a little bit better, because you're not stuck to believing one thing or another.
Right. So it's, to me, it's like, we're all taught these beliefs from our upbringing, religion and society. And it's like, to me, it's like, well, you're just taking in what this person says to be true instead of questioning it. You just take it on in as your own. And that's why I think a lot of people are so unhappy, so like even not content. They have a false identity of who they are, and that's why they struggle today. And I've never been outside of the US, so I don't know what it's like. I've read books, I've seen documentaries, that's my only way of getting like a conceptual knowing. But I look forward to actually going there to see it for myself. And I think everybody should do that.
Yeah, I started in college. I studied abroad in Australia, which speaks English, and so it was a good good way for me to dip my toe in the water. It's a little bit different, but not too much. And then places like Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam are a little bit farther outside of your comfort zone, my comfort zone, probably many people's, because you don't speak, the language is different, and it's not there's just, the developing world just isn't as easy. So you just got to figure more shit out.
Yeah, and then when you come back home, you're so appreciative, and like you don't take nothing for granted. I've
Oh my
heard people
gosh.
like go to these other countries, and they're like, my daughter went to Costa Rica for um, a sea turtle kind of
Mm.
volunteering thing, and then she went to a retreat in Bali, and she's like, Mom, I'll never take home for granted. I'll never take this for granted. Like, it's totally. I'm like, good for you that you went to go see that, because now you understand how It's not that you're privileged, it's just you're very lucky and blessed to be where you're at. But now you could show compassionate to, where other people are that don't have what you have, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so funny when we travel with our kids, and when we're doing a big international trip, they're champs. They don't complain. They're up for it. When it's hard, they're up for it. But when it's easy, they complain. Like when they don't get their like second serving of dessert, or when it's like too hot to go outside when it's not actually that hot. They're like, ah. So it's weird how these comforts, and I think this applies to anybody who's prioritizing comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, well, I just have to avoid discomfort at all costs. But that eliminates a lot of amazing things, a lot of growth, a lot of transformation,
Mm-hmm.
if you prioritize safety and comfort.
Right. And then what you said you had like an out of body experience with this mystical tree. It's like 1,000 years old. And I know it's like, to me, it's like synergistic energy exchange. It's like having sex, but energetically wise. And connecting to that, it's like an electromagnetic field because everything is of energy. We are all of energy. So, can you share what that experience, just like hugging that tree, what was that like?
Yeah, and probably if it happened to me now, it would be more of an exchange. At that point, it was more of a gift in the sense that I wasn't really expecting or prepared to receive anything from the tree other than just here's a really special old tree. So I hugged the tree or put my hands on the tree and was just like, oh, what an amazing tree. And it was like kind of an electric shock, flood of emotions, hot and cold, sweats. And then, then I got scared and I was like, oh, what is going on? And I was traveling with my ex girlfriend at the time, and she said, why don't you just sit here with the tree and have the full experience? Because I think there's something for you here. And it was very wise of her to suggest that. And so I did. I kind of sat down in inside of one of the trunks of the tree and allowed myself to relax enough that my consciousness was transported. It was like I was no longer there in that forest. I was sent to another forest in another part of the world, which was in China, northwestern China, where the Gobi Desert, kind of Mongolia, China area, where the Gobi Desert is rapidly expanding. It's one of the fastest growing desert regions in the world, I believe, still. And it's essentially this vision of sand just coming in and just choking out this forest. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is kind of scary and intense. And it was showing this to me as like, we've forgotten, humanity has forgotten its own connection with nature. Many people have. And so, and I had to an extent as well, because I was spending a lot of time, growing my business online, right? So I'm looking at a physical screen. I'm indoors building something. So I'm surrounded by walls, not really living outside, not sleeping outside, sometimes not even having my bare feet on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a reminder of, if you don't pay attention to something, then you'll forget about it.
Right.
And it was sort of a call to, spend more time with nature myself and bring leaders and change makers, entrepreneurs back into nature so they can reconnect, but also access the creativity, the wisdom, the guidance from nature for, if you're building a company, if you're building a project, you can get a lot of special insight when you allow nature into your process.
Well, and then again, I mean, based on, what I've observed and seen, what's been going on for like decades now of industries and these corporations and everything, it's, it's all about profit and making money. And, a lot of them don't think about, okay, if I go and destroy this part of the land and, take these trees and do this and that and the other, what is going to be the repercussions later down the road for future generations? How is that going to affect and like deplete our natural resources that are already here? And I think it's because of greed and power and control. And I feel like we have to wake up and shift our consciousness to where we can see finally of what's truly going on. And by doing that is like really taking a pause, get into nature, let nature show you. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would say, again, greed, power, and control are simply byproducts of a belief system. And so if you believe that you and I are separate, then I have to sort of wall off my money, my resources from you and protect my wealth because otherwise you'll take it. That's kind of where greed comes from. And right, if I don't see myself in connection with the earth, then taking from the earth is just like, you take as much as you can. But if you realize the fundamental connectivity of everything, then it's like not the future generation's problem because that's you as well. And so you would never you would never try to control someone else because it's just controlling you. Like you would never try to take more resources from someone else because that's just taking from you. And so this is a fundamental shift in perception of how we are interconnected together as humans, together as nature, together as all of the universe. And that basically eliminates all of these problems because it's coming from a different level of consciousness completely. So I think a lot of people are trying to solve problems by like addressing it. Like, okay, we're gonna, cut our emissions by 50%, or we're gonna force corporations to show us what they're doing. This is all at the same level. This is like trying to play whack-a-mole, right? Problem comes up, you try to fix it, but the level of consciousness is still the same. So you're just gonna, more and more problems are just going to arise until that fundamental way of viewing things is shifted.
Yeah, it's like the definition of sanity is you're like doing the same old system programming and whatnot, but you expect different results, and it's not going to work anymore. But it's like, have you heard of earthing?
In the sense of getting your bare feet on the ground?
Yes.
Sure.
I can't. It's funny how like you're talking about nature and whatnot, and I just got done watching this guy. I forget his name. Clinton Ober, I do believe.
Okay.
And then they get science and data based on him just walking barefoot. And then there was another scientist researcher that was doing data, like doing research, getting all this data and noticing the difference on the healing effects of getting barefoot and getting into nature. If and now I'm like, if people were more aware of this, wow, what a difference it can make.
Yeah, it's one great example with the barefoot thing is so you carry a charge in your body, right? And your body is trying to maintain its optimal set point of pH and electrical charge. And when you step on the ground, it immediately calibrates that charge and sort of recharges your batteries. And then you can look at the blood, for example, red blood cells stop clumping together. Your blood thins out almost immediately when you go barefoot on the ground. It takes like 5 seconds, right? Um, so there's phenomenal benefits to it that can happen really quick. So we as a family in the morning, we kind of have this routine where it's like we drink a bunch of water and we bless the water and, like, thank you, I respect you, I appreciate you, like, thank you for giving and sustaining my life. Then we go outside and, shirts off, full face into the sun, barefoot on the ground, doing some sun salutations. And then usually we're doing some movement or bouncing on the trampoline or something to move the lymph through us, right? And so before we eat anything, we've just touched the earth. We've stimulated our circadian rhythms by looking at the sun. We've flushed out the toxins that have come from sleep by moving the lymph. We've had water, which rehydrates after a long night's sleep. And all these things are really, they're not spiritual techniques, but they're really managing the state of the physical body, which allows you to, the cleaner you can get your physical body, the cleaner you're going to get guidance and intuition from higher dimensions, right? It just makes it a lot easier to do that. So we have a focus both with my clients, my entrepreneur clients and thought leaders, to really think like a pro athlete, to optimize your physical state so that you can do the spiritual work that you need to do.
You mentioned earlier about, entrepreneurs and business and whatnot. And, you stated that there's like 5 levels of abundance and why we shouldn't focus on money. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, as a result of capitalism, most people equate money with abundance, and there's all these ads on social media like become a 7-figure entrepreneur, and my client did $50,000 in the first hour of her launch. Okay, so there's all this focus on money, which people equate with abundance, but that's a really narrow band of focus, and it actually limits your potential. It limits your growth, both as a person and as an organization. So, of course, money is one aspect, but if you work with the definition of abundance, that is being able to do what you need to do when you need to do it, then there's actually a lot of ways to go about that. And in my work, I train different aspects because it's always nice to be able to acquire these skills, right? These are all things that you can learn and practice, not just innate things. So being lucky is part of it, right? If you're in the right place at the right time, if you want to buy a house, for example, you could buy it with money, or you could just win it in a raffle, or there's many other ways, right? Somebody could give you a house. You could trade. There's that guy that traded paper clips. He started with a red paper clip and traded his all the way up until he traded for a house using only barter, right? So there's a lot of different avenues to do what you need to do when you need to do it. And each of these aspects can be broken down and acquired as a skill so that you fully expand your pathways of abundance.
And I have a quote. I just took it off my door. I have these little quotes on my little thing. And it says, and this is to me, a perfect definition of how I resonate with abundance. Abundance is having an open heart and a life lived and experienced fully. It's
experienced fully.
Yeah.
Which means there's there's nothing in the way of doing what you want to do when you want to do it.
No. And just like synchronicities, things lining up, the universe, bringing a person to give you a message to help guide you on that, the next opportunity. And, it's just fascinating to me about there is a law of attraction. There is universal law. There's synchronicities, that's part of abundance because it's little pieces connecting the dot and then just being open to receiving and living and experiencing.
Yeah. So if we're going to talk about synchronicities, for example, you and I could have the same amount of synchronicities happening to us, right? But it depends on how we follow up with those synchronicities, how we realize that they're happening, right? We might get some really good guidance or information from the universe in terms of like we see the same animal 3 times in a day. Well, what does that mean, right? It could be something very valuable for you, or it's just an interesting phenomenon. And if you, okay, so maybe there's information there, or maybe there's synchronicity in that somebody offers you an opportunity when you're looking for it. But if you don't follow up in the right way, if you don't, like the door is open, but right, if you don't walk through and continue along, then you're not going to take full advantage of it. So there's a skill in how you collaborate with the synchronicities that you receive.
Interesting. Have
This
you
is in science, for example. So there's this great story of the guy who discovered penicillin, right, which is probably one of the best inventions that saved the most lives in history. And it was an accident. It was contamination, right? Comes from my field, microbiology. He had a petri dish and it had some mold growing on it, and he was just going to throw it away. But he noticed the mold was stopping the bacteria from growing. And he thought, I know that bacteria is a huge problem for infections after surgeries and, World War I battle wounds. It's more people dying in the hospitals than on the battlefield. And so that was the sort of eureka moment where he was like, there must be something here that's happening, but he didn't know specifically what it was yet. So he had to do the experiments to find out that it's actually this compound, penicillin, that is the effective compound here. And that's when they could make it into a medicine. So he had this amazing synchronicity, this eureka moment, but he had to do the work to take full advantage of it.
right? That's a good analogy on and perspective of looking at that with synchronicities. And okay, this is gonna sound corny, but how do you use telepathy to connect with your cat and your son?
This is something that I just enjoy experimenting with different techniques, and telepathy and telekinesis. I think if I was able to master those, that would be super cool. I would feel like a superhuman. But I'm still very beginner at those things. But it's fun to practice. And I started realizing that my cats were telepathic with me because I would start having these thoughts that I thought were my own, but eventually I realized they were the cat. It was like, I'm thinking about, whatever, something to do with my business. And all of a sudden I'm like, I should go feed my cat. It's like, where did that come from? Well, it wasn't actually for me. It was the cat standing in the door saying like, come feed me. And I thought that it was just my random thought stream that had entered my head, but it happens enough times. And then there's this sort of a back and forth where I'm speaking out loud and my cat is like planting the thoughts in my head. Like, I want to go outside, or I need some water, or feed me, or that's, there's not too much variety, but I realized that there was intent behind the communication. And so when I learned that telepathy, for me, the way I experience it is that it feels like my own thoughts, but it's actually coming from someone else. And the hardest part is distinguishing my thoughts from someone else when they're both flowing through my awareness. And so this happens to me all the time when I know exactly what someone's going to say before they say it. And I think that it's my thought, but it's actually, I'm just picking it up, 5-10 seconds ahead of when they say it. And I think what's going on is there's just a receptivity and openness I think when you have cleared the, let's call it, cleared the blockage in front of your, because the heart is the receiver of telepathy, I believe, more than
Mm-hmm.
uh, like the crown chakra or something like that.
Right.
When you have an open heart center, I believe it's just much easier to receive telepathic messages.
Wow. Because it's more of a feeling. Feeling is the language to the soul.
I don't get them as feelings. I get the actual thoughts, but I've done practice with other animals, and I get it as sensations in the body. Right, I can feel. So, so I had a friend teach me her version of animal telepathy, and I was working with horses, and these were horses that she already knew their medical conditions and their diagnosis because they were her existing clients. And she said, okay, what's going on with this horse? And I would go through and say, oh, it's got a pinched nerve in its neck, and it's got a problem with its hoof, and it's favoring its front legs because the back legs are weak or whatever it might be. And I would feel that in different places in my body. But mostly I'm getting telepathy as thoughts.
Oh, wow. See, being empathic, I would feel other people's pain, and then I would go to the guides. Okay, hold up a second. I didn't feel this like when I walked into the room, and I
Mm.
used it as a tool to be able to help that person. So I would go to my guides and I'm like, okay, how do I, what modality do I use? What, and I would just let them channel through me and go through the motions of helping that client. So I find that fascinating. But I also thought like telepathy was, like when you think of the person and all of a sudden you get a phone call from them or a text. And I was like, wow, that's a little odd. Isn't that some part of telepathy too?
Yeah, and these are perhaps the best studied uh, aspects of telepathy. They've proven that they've, like, the experiment would be you have a list of 4 people who are going to call you, and so there's a 25% chance if you were to guess randomly, and then people get it right something like 36% of the time. So much better than random in knowing who's going to call you. There's also an interesting experiment with a one-way mirror, which is so two rooms side by side with a one-way mirror, and the other person is staring at or not staring at the other person through the mirror. And so the person being stared at presses a button when they know they're being stared at, and that's so they're telepathically receiving, like, when the other person is looking at them, even though they can't see the other person.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting.
So we've all
And
had that sort of I know I'm being stared at feeling.
yeah, even in the unseen realm of in the invisible spiritual realm, I call it, is just I would get a feeling like someone, and I look around, I'm like, okay, guys, what's up? Who are you? And I felt a negative kind of vibration. I would just like, you're not allowed. Go away. Get away from me. But then if I felt, because of my channeling, I there's like guides. I call them guides, but they're like ancient civilization guides. They're highly evolved being guides that would come in and channel through me and like have a message, but it's in their native language, which I find fascinating. I have no clue what I'm
Mm.
saying. So that's the interesting part. you know uh but it's it's the vibration, the frequencies, the you know tuning into the masculine, like energy, and the feminine energy, how my body like takes a different kind of posture and
Mm.
whatnot, and then the tone of my voice. It's like I'm learning all of this and recognizing certain things. So I can't make this stuff up. But coming to like highly evolved beings and ancient civilization and everything, like you've discovered the ability to time travel. So, can you share with us like your perspective or perception of time traveling and what is that experience like and like how did this happen to you?
Yeah, it was. So speaking of these highly evolved beings, right? They operate from a dimensional awareness which is not linear time. So we here on Earth perceive time as a stream, a linear stream. Partly keeps us in this narrow band of perception of how our life goes. Partly in order to learn in a certain way, to have sensory physical experiences that progress, um, and so that's a useful way of experiencing the world, but it is a very narrow band of perception. So these higher frequential beings, right, fourth, fifth, sixth density beings, can experience time sort of simultaneous, right? So time travel is kind of like space travel as well at these higher dimensions. um, and so I was wondering, like, okay, what would it be like for me to try to have that type of experience? What would it feel like? And so I approached it, rather than trying to create a physical time machine to manipulate the space-time fabric. I said this has to become an awareness, has to come from a perspective. And so really one of the first things that I did was, um, you have to separate yourself from the collective consciousness which agrees about the time stream, right? You have to have a perspective which is of a different frequency than the here's how it is on Earth, which you can get to through experiencing gratitude, joy, peace, unconditional love, these types of higher frequency
Vibration.
emotional
Yeah.
states. Yeah. And then and then stop looking at the clock. And what I would do is I would just practice arriving in the right place at the right time, or having plenty of time to complete my tasks, because a lot of entrepreneurs that I work with, they wish they had more time because they're so busy. They want to spend time with their families, but they also want to create their mission in life, and they also want to go have some fun and all. It's like, I wish I had more time. So what does it feel like to always have enough time? And these are specific experiences rather than just the clock telling you have enough time. It's actually a feeling state. So if you start from the feeling state, then your experiences can correspond to that, and the clock time falls in line from there. And so I would go to the gym and I would say, I'm going to do a 3-hour workout or a 2-hour workout, but I only have half an hour before dinner, according to the clock. And I would make sure that I was uh, living from that state of gratitude or peace and ease, and just take my full workout and arrive home just as the table is being set in time for dinner. Or I would go out all day without looking at the clock, and I had to pick up my son from school at 3:30 on the dot. Um, and when I arrive at school, I don't know exactly what time it is, but I'm walking up to pick him up as he's walking out. And there's all these other people. They got there a little bit early, or some people got there a little bit late, but I'm the only one that walked up right at the exact perfect time when my son was walking out. Maybe, who knows what the actual clock time was, but it was the experience of I'm in the right place at the right time, and I've never had to check my clock to make that so.
Oh, wow. That's isn't it like when I'm hearing you talk, I'm like, it's almost what about I want to say like astro project, like your soul essence in having the experience and almost like a future, but you're bringing it into the present kind of thing. Would that be somewhat in a connection to time
I
traveling?
would say it's more like, the way I experience it is more like rising. It's like an astronaut, maybe. When you finally get free of the gravitational field of the agreement of time, then you can sort of move and float around more freely.
Because I've been like practicing on like I want to astral project. I want to like, you know, usually they say at nighttime, when you're in sleep, like a deep REM, I guess, sleep, that your soul sort of leaves and you're traveling and doing all this other thing, and then you come back before you wake up, kind of thing. And people have had some crazy experiences from doing that. I'm like, I just want to astral project so I could go to other dimensions and meet other people and beings, and yeah, I want to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that I do in dream time, and it's another, like another thing that entrepreneurs want is, they want access to creativity or good decision making or knowing exactly what to do, or like really customers coming really easy, right? All of these things can be done in dream time when you know how to pay attention and you know how to instruct your consciousness to go and do something for you, because you're not bound by the same rules when you're in dream time, right? You don't have gravity, you don't have all these constraints of the physical world, so there's a lot more you can get done. Someone recently told me that one night of dream time is like 3 months of productive work in waking time, which is amazing.
Wow. And then like what, like I've heard other uh I guess other people having experiences where they would quantum leap and connect with their, I guess, other self or higher self to get advice, or future self to get advice on what they needed to do in the like now kind of moment. Have you, met people that have done that and experienced that yourself?
Well, another aspect of time travel would be to go to a different space-time location, right, to the future or to the past. And because we are essentially fractals, right? If you think of an oversoul consciousness unit, and then all of your lifetimes, past
Mm-hmm.
lives, future lives, and you now are all extending down from that oversoul, like branches on a tree. So if you can sort of send your awareness up the branch and back down to the you that's in the future, right? And that's still fundamentally the same branch, but with a different endpoint experience. So the easiest way to go to the future, like find a past life back in Roman times or dinosaur times or whatever it might be, and just that version that is you, and just go and look at the world through that version of you, through their eyes. It's actually easier than trying to go as someone else. So you can essentially just tune into what it's like for that version of you, and then just see the world as they're walking around the Colosseum in Rome, and just experience life through them.
And then I know about energetic traumas. So, and past traumas, you know, like because of the experience of like maybe I was in Rome and they were torturing, those that did not convert to Christianity, and they were, you know, if I was back in that time and I was experiencing that torture, that might have carried in my present of something else kind of trauma. So you could go back and find out the root of why you suffer, or conditions, diseases as well, to heal from it. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, listen to the way you're speaking, right? You're talking about going back, and that's the perspective, right, of linear time stream. But
Mm-hmm.
really, all these lives are happening simultaneously, right? So if you heal from it now in your life, it's simultaneously healing the event as it's happening in the past.
Oh, that's a different perspective of looking at it. Because I was thinking like past life regression
Mm-hmm.
of, what's affecting me now. The root of where it began was in a past life. So if I could correct it, change it, it would change in my present.
Yeah, it's so you can go forwards and backwards, right? If you heal yourself now, then your future self thanks you. But if you heal it in the future, then it changes the present as well. So if you're having a great life in this lifetime, it could be the work of your future self or your past self doing their spiritual work.
Oh, wow. I never looked at it that in that perspective. Thank you.
Sure.
It's, so what are you have your own podcast, the Derek Loudermilk Show,
Yeah.
and where can people find you on that?
Yeah. So, wherever you listen to podcasts, and then my website is derekloudermilk.com. And we've got a lot of other things on the website, including this New Earth community project we're working on, which is a way to implement a lot of the research that I've done in the metaphysical world. But it's also, as we were talking about, what's going to fix all these problems that we see around us. It's operating from a new level of consciousness, right? And so, really holding that as a container for how we relate to each other on a day-to-day basis. So living from the heart, communicating authentically, being aware of the present moment and what's real for us in the present moment. And so there's a lot of fun things you can do from there, right? You can experiment with regenerative agriculture. We're going to have a healing center, all kinds of things. So that's another project you can go to my site and read about. But I really love having these wild experiences, understanding the research, and then applying them to the world in a way that is exciting and helpful for people.
Well, I'm all about, awaken, educate, learn, evolve, heal, transform, and be the best authentic version of you. So we can all, not just individually, live our best life now, but we all start like connecting and unifying together, uniting together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
right there with you.
it would change our whole perception of how we've been living. But when we can change in here first, then we help change the world for the better. We have to become better first, and then the world becomes better. And that's what I thrive for. That's my mission.
Yeah, I have a little practice exercise that I want to offer you in how to, like, what parts of ourselves do we change first, or how do we
Mm-hmm.
go about changing the world by changing ourselves. And what I find is most fruitful for me is whenever I get upset about something in the world, whenever something sticks out to me, like, I don't like that, I want to change that in the world. I don't like this war, or I don't like this tyranny, or I don't like this oppression, whatever it is. That's the sign for me to heal it in myself, because there's a lot of things that I'm not even noticing that are happening, but they're not coming up for me. So when I see something particularly that I don't like in the world, that's what I work on in myself. So where am I seeking to oppress someone, or defaulting to trying to control someone just because I'm bigger, or because I have more privilege, or whatever. So this is the I think the way, because whatever you see that you want to shift, like, that's what you have to shift first in yourself, right? You don't want the government to keep secrets. Well, where are you still keeping secrets because you're afraid if you told the truth?
Oh, wow. Because I'm all about, well, being a Virgo and virtue and honesty and integrity. I'm all about that. So, because the truth sets you free, so if you're living authentic and being honest with yourself, then you can be with honest to others. So, it's like, why doesn't everybody else do that? That's my thing. Is like, why can't everybody just do that? It makes life a lot easier. Because I'm like, everyone's like, you talk too much, you're so open, you're so this, and I'm like, I can't help that, that's just me. I'd rather be this way because I see how other people are being, and I can't understand why be that way. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. I'm like, why? Because it's like law of attraction. It's karma and things like that. Like, do you not realize what you put out, you get back? And if there's anger, there's deceit, there's dishonesty, it's gonna come and bite you in the butt. You're gonna pay for it later. So I'd rather get a reward than a beating or something. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I just like don't get it. And then looking at, because I study history. So if you don't learn your history, you're destined to repeat it. So that's also an energetic, individual and collective. So I'm like, okay, if you could wake up to what was going on in history and learn about history, you'll see a pattern. You'll see the cycle, the pattern, and that energetic energy of that trauma just passing forward. So if you could wake up, we can instantly like, oh, now I get this. That realization, aha moment, we can shift things from repeating itself.
Yeah, you keep getting the lessons until you learn them.
I know, right? I'm like, why don't we wake up to this? And I guess that's why I started the podcast. Is like to educate and like question your own beliefs. How are your beliefs serving you? Or are they somebody else's beliefs and you took them on as yourself, and that's why you struggle in certain areas and aspects of your life, because you're really not living your true authentic self. You're living somebody else's.
Yeah, and this, when I work with entrepreneurs, their capabilities of creating, a global sized organization, right, depends on their identity, their belief structures, much more than the habits or the actions that they're taking. And so a lot of times we will go in and address those things and learn how to, you can manipulate your identity. You can have a new identity that's more useful, that's more empowering. But you have to understand how the subconscious mind works and how to shift beliefs in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, you'll just keep doing it how you've been doing it.
Right. And the definition of sanity, keep doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting different results. That's insanity. But then I've learned, do you also go with this with your clients? It's like, okay, what have you done in the past or keep trying to do that's not working? Look at it in a different perspective of, oh, wait a minute. It's like breaking it down into little fragments of why it wasn't working because of that one little thing. And then once you like connect the dots of, oh, now I know why it didn't work, because I was missing this little element, and it just shifts things kind of thing. Do you get that a lot with working with your clients?
Yeah, and sometimes you can't predict which modality, which pattern of coaching or healing work is going to break it open. But the benefit of the coach, right? You can see the patterns, right? You can see exactly what someone's doing over and over again, and then you can bring awareness to it and come up with a plan to shift out of it.
And do you experience working with your clients when they solve their own issue by having that aha moment and that self-realization, like the light bulb goes on? Have you experienced that with your clients?
Sure. Yeah. It's yeah. It's just when it's like maybe you just experience everything as much easier because you stopped overthinking it. Maybe you just stopped thinking, and that just makes all the difference. You're not in your head about it anymore. You're trusting your own competence. You've proven to yourself in a bunch of different ways that you know what to do, and then you just do it.
So what do you do, Derek, for fun to just like take a break from everything and just do something for fun?
Well, I used to be a pro cyclist, so I do a lot of different. I'm always doing physical challenges. Right now, I'm playing competitive ultimate frisbee, which I did last night. Uh, I'm growing a lot of different things. We eventually will, when we have this community, we'll have a garden. But I've spent the last 2 years learning the growing conditions of almost, you know, the top 50 things that you can grow, from pumpkins to watermelon to squash to beans and peas to tomatoes and herbs. And I'm really interested in the science of growing. And eventually I hope to use like uh, acoustic fertilizer or vibrational fertilizer or biogeometry in order to increase crop yields and apply some of these more esoteric techniques to optimize food production. But it's also, there's just getting to know plants, right, and talking to them and seeing how they grow and deal with different conditions has been really enjoyable for me for the last couple of years.
I would look into Brussels sprouts.
Okay, yeah, I haven't tried Brussels sprouts.
It's like that would be one of the survival foods that I would definitely start growing because they could be in warm weather, they could be in winter. They're like one of your survival foods from what my boyfriend tells me. He goes, if anything, Brussels sprouts. I was like, really? Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
So he goes, they won't die. It's like he lived in Seattle and he was like, I was growing them, but and I'm like, well, what about here in Florida? He's like, well, I'm not sure, but I'm gonna tell you, they're like survival. That's your survival. Like if like the world was coming to an end, or a catastrophe was happening, hurricane, get your Brussels sprouts. They'll survive the hurricane.
There you go. Yeah.
So,
And
but
just
what
having
is
seeds too.
yeah, the seeds. Well, that's interesting. I'm like, and where is it that you are located where you're being able to farm? What climate, environment?
We're in Missouri. We're
Okay.
in St. Louis. Yeah.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
a nice growing season here.
So what have you studied like in other like for the Pacific coast? What works in that like environment, and then the mid and then the east kind of thing? Are you learning, what's the best?
Just understanding like when you can get stuff in the ground and when to do seedlings, and can you plant stuff multiple times throughout the summer, and it puts me in touch with the seasons in a new way.
I bet. And it's fascinating to me because I'm like I'm not in like the green thumb and into that, but I've always been fascinated. Like, okay, why is it that certain parts they grow certain things in certain parts of the United States,
Hmm.
and now then you got like the droughts, then you got this, so it's like what is I'm like a researcher and like an investigator, like, okay, so if this is droughting, why can't they take that same kind of thing and plant and seed and whatnot in parts that do get the plenty of water and rain and things like that? So I was just curious about how that
Yeah. Well,
all.
here's something interesting about that, which is we get a lot of apples from Washington State, right?
Mm-hmm.
They advertise for them. There's a lot of supply there, and there's a lot of wine regions there. There's not a lot of orchards in Missouri, partly because it's too moist, and so you get root rot, and the trees are stunted in that way because the soil is essentially too moist and too it's clay. There's a lot of clay here, so very fine, dense soil.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so there's only one orchard, commercial food orchard in Missouri, but there's a ton in Washington State, right? Just because of both the soil and the climate and things like that.
Wow, and I know there are some apple orchards in North Carolina too. I think they're Macintosh apples. There's different types
Hmm.
of apples. So it's, yeah, okay, that makes sense. If it's too, watery or too moist, it could do more harm than good. Then,
Yeah, but anywhere east of the Mississippi, there's plentiful rainfall, and so right, the difference between these desert climates can be 2 inches to 60 inches, right, in Missouri. And so you just have an abundance of water. There's river systems, there's rainfall. And so if you match the soil and the rainfall and the sunlight, you're pretty far along the way to high production.
oh, fascinating. Well, I wish you the best of success in that. And it's just, the purpose of what you're doing with farming, seeding, and whatnot is part of the community of more eco-friendly, of showing people like, hey, you could grow your own stuff. Here's what you could do.
Yeah, when I think about the future, I think most people will be living in sort of high tech agrarian societies. Like when we refine our technology so that we have teleportation and sort of telepathy, right? Then we don't have to. We can travel anywhere we need. So it'll be like, what is the benefits of a city, right? Which is the condensed experiences, right? The opportunity to do a bunch of different things. If either we have hover car technology, ultra fast transit, which we're gonna, right? The Navy has released its UFO patents, right? So that there's gravitational drive systems which are already being built into flying cars. That's coming down in the next couple of years, right? So if you have ultra fast flying cars or teleportation, then people are just going to live in small communities wherever they want, and will grow food together, and will sort of, 150 people is an optimal size for what a community is, because you can keep track of all the relationships. When they get bigger than that, then it gets too unwieldy. And so I think we'll have these smaller units of society that sort of govern themselves, but are more interconnected in a way. And this will be part of that, right? Just knowing how to, each community will be probably closer to its food sources.
Oh, it's like a futuristic sci-fi movie.
Yeah, but it's, coming to a village near you.
I love it. Well, Derek, it's truly a honor and a pleasure of having you on this show. Thank you so much for taking the time out today and having this experience with me today. And I left all the information on how they can get a hold of you in the description notes. So if you want some quantum business coaching, everything's right there for them to reach out.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and have a wonderful, blessed rest of your week. And I look forward to staying in contact with you and having you on the show again.
All right. There's lots to talk about. So yeah,
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
be in touch.
Okay, definitely. Well, there you go. Time traveling, quantum physics, and so much more, and how you can get creative even if you're an entrepreneur. So check Derek out, and you never know who I'm going to have on this show. So stay tuned to Wake Up with KC.